Today I wanted to talk about my favorite simple ways to record audio for video with a mirrorless camera, and specifically with the Panasonic GH5. So what I'm going to be talking about is just going to be using a microphone, a couple different microphone types, and plugging either directly in or using a very simple wireless setup. But right now I'm just plugging directly into the camera, right into the 3.5 millimeter input, and I'm not going to be using any external recorders or any XLR adapters or anything like that. So this is going to be very simple. So I'm using the Rode VideoMic Pro, and this is an older model. Actually, I think they still sell this model, but there's a Pro Plus model now. And if that model had been out when I bought this, I would have rather gotten the other model because it has a couple of features that I would like. But this one sounds really good, and I've been able to make it work for what I use it for, so I haven't really seen any need to necessarily update. But anyway, just word to the wise, if you're in the market for one of these and you're willing to spend just a few extra dollars, I would definitely get the Plus model at this point. But this is the Rode VideoMic Pro, plugged directly in by way of an extension cable, of course, because it takes a little bit more cable length to get to the microphone. But remember, when you're using a shotgun mic, I know there's a temptation to just put it on top of the camera, on the hot shoe on the camera, and plug in there, and that's great for vlogging when you're holding the camera really close to your face. But when you're just a little bit further away from the camera, it starts to really thin out the sound, and you just don't get as much signal, and it just gets a lot less bass response, and you'll get a lot more just extraneous noise. So the sound quality is much better if it's closer like this. So you know, just like as they say, a hang 10 away from my face, and that really helps get me a good full signal with a very low amount of noise. So anyway, this is my favorite, kind of my baseline, and I always use this when I have an opportunity to. Now, almost never do I let the mic sit in the frame like this. I'm doing it for this video just so you can see it, but I usually keep it about the same distance, but I boom it overhead so it's just out of the frame, so you don't see it in the shot, and I think that's a lot cleaner. But for the purpose of this video, I did want you to see the mic. So in this case, I have the mic set to 0 dB, so it's not boosting or cutting. And I also have on the back of the mic, there's the little high pass filter, so I have that on because I want to cut everything below 80 hertz in there. It's just not useful with me just talking to the camera. So just to get that noise out, I just have that set. So again, that's high pass filter is on, and I have the gain set at 0 dB. Okay, so then when I get into the camera, the GH5 has a pretty hot preamp, so I have that set down at -8. I'm not like a super loud talker, but it still can clip real easy and just push the preamps a little bit too hard. So GH5 and other Panasonic cameras tend to be really hot, so make sure that if you're using one of these cameras, make sure that your audio levels are low enough so that you get all your dynamic range without clipping. I do use the limiter that's on the GH5 just in case there is a nasty little point where it gets too loud. That will cut that. But you don't want to be up against that limiter too much, so make sure your level is low enough if you're using a Panasonic camera. Okay, so I'm going to switch over to this same setup, but with a different microphone. I'm going to use the Lav Mic that's on my collar right now, and I will hook it up the same exact way, and it's just going to be plugged into the same extension cable directly in to the camera, and we'll see how that sounds. Okay, now I've switched over to this Rode Lavalier mic, and this is a pretty nice Rode lavalier. It has the little Micon connector on the end, so I've got a couple of different, like 3 different connectors. You can connect it to 3.5 millimeter. I have one that has the little Sennheiser type lock on it, and I also have an XLR adapter for it. But this is the regular 3.5 millimeter Micon adapter plugged into the same exact cable that I had, extension cable that I had the Rode VideoMic Pro plugged into. And in this case, I've lowered the gain on the GH5 just a little bit more, all the way down to -12, because this mic, for some reason, it does come in real hot on the GH5, and it'll clip really easily, so I'm keeping it down even further. So this is -12 on the GH5 with the Rode lavalier plugged in through the extension cable, and this is one of my favorite setups for a lavalier, but there is a limited amount of mobility even with the extension cable. For one thing, you don't want to jar it loose with where it's plugged into the extension cable, and also there's just a limited amount of distance you can travel before you're pulling your camera over or pulling the cable out and unplugging it. So you're able to move around some, and you don't have to worry about whether the batteries are charged up or anything like that in a wireless unit this way. But you do have a limit to how far you can go, and you also have to be careful about the cable, about unplugging it or just knocking it around and making noise. So just something to consider with this. But I do like the setup, and I think it's a pretty strong signal, full signal, but not quite as good as for general purposes anyway as the Rode VideoMic Pro. But the one thing that you do gain about mobility with the Lav Mic is that you're able to move around. I can change the direction of my face and things like that, and it doesn't change so much on this little omnidirectional mic that really stays close to me. So if I get up and walk around, or if I'm doing something and they're showing something, turning around while I'm talking, the sound will stay relatively the same. Whereas with the shotgun mic, of course, if it's in one place and nobody's just holding a boom and following it around, well then it's just gonna go very quiet when you turn off to the side, or if you change your proximity or distance at all to the mic or go off axis with it, it will get much quieter, and you're just going to have a bit of a problem trying to level all that out in post. So with a Lav Mic, you've just got a little bit more flexibility that way. And again, this is one of my favorites. It's the little Rode Lavalier. I think it was like 250 bucks or something like that. So it is kind of a nicer one. I think there's a lot of other ones on the market right now that are just about, sound almost as good, that cost a lot less, maybe are designed just specifically to be used with a camera like this, whereas this is much more flexible for other professional purposes. But anyway, I do like this mic a lot, and it's one of my favorites to use. Now I'm using the Rode Wireless Go. Now this is a really inexpensive wireless mic setup that works like a little Lav mic. You just clip it on yourself here. It's got a built-in microphone. Now there is a jack that I can plug in another mic, and I'll demonstrate that momentarily. But for now I just wanted to demonstrate the internal built-in mic on the transmitter, and then that's going into the GH5 by way of the receiver for the Rode Wireless Go, which is set to its lowest output. Again, the GH5's preamps are pretty hot, so I'm sending a very weak, the weakest signal I can from the Wireless Go into that 3.5 millimeter input on the GH5. And in this case, I've got the GH5 set at -8 dB. So not all the way down, but down a good bit to try to preserve my dynamic range and not get any clipping. Okay, to me, this is one of the best uses for the built-in microphone on the Rode Wireless Go, because you don't really have to fuss around with plugging in another mic and scanning channels and all the things you might have to do with a different kind of lav setup, and you're not connected to the camera. So it's very convenient and quick to set up. So this does free things up and make it really easy to use, and it sounds pretty good. Okay, so now one of the big advantages of using a wireless setup, obviously, is that you can do things like this where I don't have to be tethered to the camera. I can just use the wireless capabilities. And in this case, because it's a Wireless Go, I can't go very far, but this is a pretty nice little distance, probably about 15-20 feet from the camera, and it should work out really well. And I'm not using another microphone, so it's a very simple setup. I'm just using the built-in mic on the transmitter, and I've got a little furry on here just in case there's a gust of wind, which I don't expect right now, but it's a good safety measure. But anyway, just to say that I'm able to move freely with this setup, and it's very inexpensive and easy to use. So really cool way to have a simple solution for good audio when you're using the GH5 or any mirrorless camera. Again, this little setup far exceeded my expectations. I didn't think it was going to be all that great when I first bought it. I resisted buying it for a long time. I thought it was maybe was just too cheap to be good or whatever. But I've been really impressed with it. It actually works really well as long as you stay in line of sight and don't get more than about maybe 40 feet from between the transmitter and the receiver. And it tends to be, as long as it's making a signal, it tends to be very clean. So I'm really impressed by that, and again, you can augment this setup by plugging different mics in to the 3.5 millimeter jack that's on the transmitter unit. So I'm going to demonstrate that now. So now I'm still using the Wireless Go, but I've got the Rode Lavalier plugged into the transmitter. So that's what I'm using right now, is this Rode Lavalier with the mic-on adapter plugged into the 3.5 millimeter input of the Rode Wireless Go. And the Wireless Go's receiver is still set to the lowest output with the GH5 at -8 dB to still preserve my dynamic range and hopefully not clip. Okay, so this is a really good setup that sort of gives you the convenience of wireless, but a little bit better sound quality than what's built into the Wireless Go. It's still very convenient though, because the Wireless Go doesn't require hardly any setup at all. You just have to turn the two components on and have it plugged into the camera, and you're just ready to go as long as you've got your levels set right. So this one has been a surprisingly good setup, I think, and I've really enjoyed it already. I haven't had it long, but I really enjoyed it. And again, the Wireless Go has surpassed my expectations, really. It sounds so much better and works so much better than I really expected it to at this price point. Okay, so one more setup, and that will involve the Rode VideoMic Pro plugged into the Wireless Go. So let's check that out. Alright, I'm back on the Rode VideoMic Pro where I started, but this time I'm going through the Rode Wireless Go system, and I've got the Wireless Go's receiver set to the middle setting, so I think that's about a 12 dB cut that's sending into the GH5, which is also set to a 12 dB cut, which is the maximum cut you can get, or the lowest setting you can get on the audio inputs, because this is a pretty hot signal coming through this mic for some reason, but I do think it's within range of what works out well. It keeps things nice and dynamic, but it is full and strong, so it's a good signal. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed this little variety of ways I like to plug things directly into the GH5 for audio, especially for these talking type things. If it's something that involves music or anything where you got to have a much more detailed and dynamic sort of recording, stereo recording, things like that, then you kind of need to get into something like having an external recorder or something like that. I like to use regular home studio recording setup here for things like that, or if I'm on location, I at least use a little field recorder or something so I can capture stereo sound. But for these talking things, you can get a really good voice signal and tone if you use a decent microphone. Make sure it's close to you, and use just the simplest little setups, and be careful about your audio settings. So I hope you enjoyed checking this out. If you've got anything that you'd like to add, what's your favorite? I'd like to hear about what you like to use with any mirrorless camera, not just the GH5. So if you've got something you'd like to share, please put that in the comments, questions, anything like that. I'd definitely like to hear from you. I'll try to get back to anybody who comments and writes on this channel, as long as it's not mean. Alright, so anyway, hope to talk to you soon. Hope to see you in the next one, and click like, subscribe, and I'll see you soon.